Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Toon podcast, the Southern Hemisphere's biggest and best podcast. All things Newcastle United. Tonight, we've got a very special guest. We're here to talk about Champions League football back at St James's Park for the first time since March 2003, when a little Spanish club called Barcelona come to town. Paris Saint-Germain will be making their first trip to St James's Park since they existed. Kickoff is at 8 o'clock local time. 6 o'clock in the morning for us here in Melbourne and Sydney, 5 a.m. I think for the Queenslanders, and for everyone else, I suggest you check your local guides. But we're lucky enough to join by French football expert. You can find him on CBS Sports. The last time he was with us, he gave us some very interesting and insightful information about Sven Botman and another man called Hugo Ekiteke, who we don't really need to talk about anymore, who's a bit fallen from grace. His second time on the show, so officially a friend of the pod. Mr. Jonathan Johnson, how are you, mate?
Doing very well, thanks. And yourself? Thanks a lot for having me on. Always a pleasure to make these appearances, and delighted to be officially a friend of the pod now.
Yes, absolutely. Look, it's great to have you back. We'll get stuck into it because we've got a lot to get through in a short amount of time. Like I said, first Champions League game back at St James's Park since 2003. I'm not sure if you've seen on social media the last kind of 12 to 24 hours. Our major sponsor, Seller, have put an amazing drone show above the city of Newcastle, which is absolutely mental. I still can't believe that they're all drones making these shapes and making a move and everything like that. I think the city's at fever pitch at the moment, and with one of the biggest clubs in the world coming to town. For those of you who haven't followed, I guess, French football, they haven't had the best start, have they?
No, it's not been the best start to the season if you're judging, purely on results. But I guess I'm here to add the context as to why. I think it's important to bear in mind that PSG have basically overhauled their entire squad over the summer, despite the fact that the starting 11 might still be quite a few of the same faces from last year. The mentality, the chemistry, obviously the head coach as well, completely different. And, PSG are pursuing a different route towards potential continental success. We know that PSG's Qatari owners have targeted Champions League glory since the very beginning of their time in charge of the club. Luis Enrique now in charge, obviously a Champions League winner with Barcelona back in 2015. It's a work in progress. I think we can say there's definitely positive signs for PSG in terms of the new team chemistry they're building. There's a number of French talents in this current crop, which is not something we've said too often about PSG in the last couple of years. Obviously, Kylian Mbappe is still the main man, the talisman of this team, but also at the same time, it's now a completely different style of play. As PSG have so far shown themselves to definitely get up for the bigger games, so beating Lens at home, also Champions League club. Lyon, although that's not too difficult in their current form. Marseille, bitter rivals of PSG in Europa League contenders, and also Borussia Dortmund in the opening game of the Champions League. So, when they do need to turn it on, they've been able to so far. But this one is a tricky one for PSG, and I think you have to factor in the fact that the stakes are a bit higher in this game, given that Newcastle are Saudi-owned and PSG are Qatari-owned.
Yes.
The geopolitical rivalry that comes into effect as well. But no, it's been an interesting start to the season, and although I can understand being encouraged sort of based on PSG's form, I would say that this is probably a very different PSG side to the one that many people are expecting to see on the field at St James's Park on Wednesday.
Yeah, look, I'll put this out there straight away. The last thing I want to do is get down a geopolitical wormhole and end up down the bottom of that. So I've got no interest in talking about that. I just want to circle back to, you said basically like a bit of a little mini regeneration, I guess, of the side. What were the reasons for that?
Many reasons. At the end of the day, PSG have pursued glory with a number of superstar names for quite a few years, and it's never really worked out. So you see the likes of Neymar, the likes of Messi, the likes of Sergio Ramos leaving the club over the summer, but a number of the peripheral names as well, those who have sort of bloated the squad over a number of years, have been moved on. Julian Draxler, Marco Verratti as well, obviously He was more key than some of those other sort of peripheral members. But by the end of his time with PSG, had firmly been cast aside. And despite these players individually having phenomenal amounts of talent, I think you look at some of the destinations as to where they've gone, and it's quite telling that European clubs didn't want to take a risk on them, and that's because at the end of the day they got too comfortable in Paris, and were not playing at the best of their abilities, and because of that, PSG were too often reliant on individual brilliance as opposed to a really solid collective, and that's sort of what's in the process of being changed at the moment under Luis Enrique. This PSG team does now work as a team. You see pressing from the attacking players, which wasn't the case, with the likes of Neymar and Messi. And just greater sort of implication to task. And it seems like it's been a real breath of fresh air, not just for the fans, but for the supporters as well. And PSG fans will travel in their droves to the game this week, and they do love an away day and normally help to generate a fantastic atmosphere. So I think the mix of the Newcastle fans with the traveling PSG fans should be more electric perhaps than usual. But no, I mean, there is a sort of a feeling of optimism, I'd say, surrounding PSG for what the future might hold, despite the fact that results have been sort of on and off so far this season.
Yeah, so you think that was going to be my next question. Obviously, the big sort of departures with Neymar and Messi leaving in the off-season. I did see a fair bit on social media, so towards the back end of the season, that they were getting a fair bit of stick from the locals and things like that. So, like you said, I'm tipping that was sort of met with positive sort of, positive influences and things like that from the fan base to get rid of them type of players and get people who are going to be there for the right reasons and something you can build around and something a bit more sustainable rather than just bringing in these superstar players in for a sugar hit sort of every year.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think the thing that really frustrated the fans by the end of Neymar and Messi's time at the club was just there was no real sort of sense of emotional involvement in the club's well-being and sort of what it was targeting. And I think it reached a point where the fans were turning away from the club, and the club had to do something to bring them back in and sort of rejuvenating the squad, completely rebuilding it, building up the positions properly in terms of having a bit of squad depth. Those were important steps, I think, towards the fans realizing that, the club's hierarchy was waking up to the fact that there was massive discontent with, these players who were being paid massive amounts of money and not really. It's not necessarily because they weren't doing it on the pitch, because at the end of the day, you can lose a game in the Champions League, for any number of reasons, not just through bad performances. You can, have a decision that goes against you and it puts you out of the competition. But it's there wasn't really any sort of sense of the emotional attachment to PSG's fortunes from those star players anymore. They've become too complacent, and that's why I think the supporters were so, wouldn't say glad to see the back of all of those star names, because obviously it was a very emotional decision to part with Marco Verratti, but they were, I think, quite satisfied to see sort of the end of the kind of mercenary era, if we can call it that, at PSG.
Yeah, and I think clubs, especially like Newcastle, they obviously don't have the financial clout that your PSGs and your Man Cities do now. But I think they've learned a lot from them clubs in the first place to not so much go for that, like you said, that sugar hit of a player. That they've tried to build it smart, and I think they have been sort of handcuffed a little bit with the amount of money they can spend. But they still seem to try and find the right player that they need, rather than just a player who's going to sell some shirts or get some more social media interactions and things like that. So I think, as bad as they've been a really good sort of a marker, I guess, for clubs like Newcastle to learn off and try and not make the same mistakes as them clubs have made. And I think now, and fair play to them, that they've sort of realised what they want to be, and they're going to try and make this whole ownership thing a bit more sustainable and look for long-term success, rather than just, like I said, that sugar hit each year with players who are there for the money and not actually there to win games and be with the club and stuff like that. So I think that'll be a good thing for them in the long run. Like you said, it might be a little bit of short-term pain, maybe the first half of the year while it all sort of figures itself out. But once it's up and running, I think they'll be probably back to where they think they want to be pretty shortly. I'll quickly bring up this slide, Jonathan, from the weekend's game. This was was it a 0-0 draw? I think it was against.
Yeah, it was a goalless draw against Clermont. But what I would say is a number of players sort of got rotated out of the team ahead of this one. I don't know if Newcastle fans have sort of paid attention to the fitness of PSG players going into the game, but they just had Nuno Mendes ruled out after surgery on his hamstring, which will probably keep him out for the rest of the year. So suddenly that makes somebody like Luca Hernandez a much more important figure. Normally he plays left back, so I think what you can expect to see from PSG, if they try and go back to their 4-3-3 formation, will be Hernandez coming in on the left, Marquinhos and Skriniar in central defence, Hakimi dropping back to be the right back in sort of a back four, and then the midfield will probably be Vitinha, but you'll certainly see Ugarte and Warren Zaïre-Emery come back in, and that together is probably PSG's first choice midfield three. And I think it's quite telling that each time Ugarte is rotated out of the PSG side at this moment in time, the midfield looks a lot less convincing and a lot more pedestrian. I think the issues that PSG are having at the moment is trying to get that front three of Mbappe, Colomboani and Dembele really firing, and that's probably why we saw Luis Enrique still go for a strong attack at the weekend, despite the obvious holes in the other areas of the team. But there are a number of players in this PSG squad that can make a big difference. And now Gonzalo Ramos is up and running for goals as well this season. There's not just chances to score through Mbappe, through Colomboani, but also Ramos off the bench as well, assuming that he doesn't start.
Yeah, well, I think I reckon quite a few Newcastle fans were pretty happy a couple of weeks ago when Mbappe was subbed off with I think it was a calf injury, it might have been, and I think there was a lot of it was ankle. Yeah, a lot of people were excited. There were some that were disappointed because obviously they want to see the best players, and that was part of the hook of a glamour tie like this, was to see the world's best players playing at St James's Park. But I think most of them were sort of leaning towards, I'm glad he's not playing because that's one less problem we have to deal with. But he come back on the weekend, and so unfortunately for us, he's going to be playing as well. Who's a player? Like, obviously they've got stars everywhere, but who's someone maybe a bit of a lesser light who Newcastle fans should be keeping an eye on for the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key battle in this one is definitely going to be between Ugarte and Bruno Guimaraes, and I think whoever sort of wins that battle will help their team help to dominate in the midfield. But I actually think that probably the guy who flies under the radar the most at the moment, because he's so young, is Warren Zaïre-Emery. But he really is a generational talent and somebody to keep an eye on. Expect him to start. And he looked very mature against Dortmund a couple of weeks ago in the opening round of games. And I think him as part of that midfield three, he's definitely one to keep an eye on that some Newcastle fans might not yet have heard much about.
So, and how old is he?
So Emery is 17.
Yeah, so, right. Which is really, I guess, especially from a Newcastle point of view, a player who I think would relish the chance to maybe impose himself on a 17-year-old is Joel Linton. But unfortunately, he's picked up, I think it was a hamstring injury. I think 5 minutes after he came on the weekend, he come back somewhat unexpectedly, I think, for the Man City Carabao Cup game midweek, and then he was on the bench on the weekend. He come on, lasted 5 minutes, come on a bit, maybe the early 60s, and he was off within about 5 minutes with a hamstring injury. So that's going to be a massive blow, especially for us, when you combine the fact we've got sort of Harvey Barnes and Joe Willock out injured as well. There's sort of your left, especially Willock and Joel Linton can play the left side of midfield and left wing position as well. So with Harvey Barnes, his foot injury keeping him out till probably the new year, I think Anthony Gordon's probably going to shoulder a lot of that load in that position, at least until the international break, until these guys can hopefully come back from injury. So, yeah, I think he's going to be a real big miss because he is a very, I think, or I call him the Brazilian bulldozer. He's a very powerful player and gets stuck in. And I think he probably would have been licking his chops with a 17-year-old still in his vicinity. But unfortunately for us, he's not going to make it. And we've got Sven Botman as well, who's going to be injured, I think, out until the international break, which is going to be a bit of a blow. But personally, I think it's going to be a fantastic thing for Jamal Lascelles to lead the team out for their first home game. He's been here for a lot of dark times and almost single-handedly kept the dressing room together when everything else seemed to be burning around him, and kept all the players together. And I think it's going to be a really good reward for him to have the captain's armband on and lead the team out for their first game in 20 years. So I think, and especially for the Newcastle side, I think the only change I can see, given the injury list, is maybe Sandro Tonali coming in for Elliot Anderson. I think they've it looks like they're managing him for the Champions League games and sort of bringing him off the bench for the Premier League games for maybe half an hour and stuff like that. So I think that's maybe Almiron for Murphy, but his confidence probably up. He scored a great goal on the weekend, so I could probably see him holding his spot as well. So maybe one change, possibly two for Newcastle, but I think that's it. We've 5 clean sheets as well in our last 5 games, which was massive. A bit of a shaky start to the season, but I think that AC Milan result really sort of galvanised the group and gave them belief. But all I just want to see a goal. We haven't scored. We've had a few big games in cup finals and we haven't scored. And so I don't really care about the score. I just want to see us score a goal and see the enjoyment of the fans' faces and stuff like that. So what else do you think, sort of the way they play and stuff like that? Are they a high pressing team and things like that now with the new manager? Do Newcastle sort of need to keep a lookout for that sort of stuff?
Well, obviously, Luis Enrique is a coach who has very much come from the sort of passing and possession-based style of play. So you'll see a lot of PSG trying to keep the ball and sort of work their way into chances. They do obviously have a lot of pace in some key areas, the likes of Mbappe, obviously, but a number of other players, Hakimi, for example, who showed his set piece prowess as well. So it's, they're a team who are still sort of working out exactly how their attack will work, which kind of makes them seem a little bit clunky going forward at times. But when they can play that first choice midfield, suddenly they have a lot more structure and a lot more balance. So really the key for PSG is to get the attack firing, because if they can, then this is a team that has already shown against the likes of Marseille, the likes of Lyon, the likes of Lens, that they can be prolific against the bigger teams they come up against. They just have to find a way to make that work. And sort of Dortmund wasn't the best example of that, because they needed a penalty early in the second half, and then a fantastic goal from Hakimi to sort of seal it. So if they continue to show the same sort of chemistry issues against Newcastle, then perhaps there is hope for the home side to get a good result. Sort of doing my prediction ahead of the game, I did predict a PSG win, but wouldn't surprise me if it was a narrow one. And they have their shaky moments as well in defence. It helps when you've got Ugarte and Marquinhos on the pitch, because they're two sort of central figures in terms of the way that the team is set up. But I certainly think that Skriniar, who spent a lot of the second half of last season with Inter out through injury, is still finding his feet as he gets back to full fitness. So he's someone who Newcastle will probably target in terms of a potential weak link, as well as Vitinha, who fans might remember from a short spell with Wolves. But overall, PSG are certainly not the same creature that have sort of fallen short on the Champions League stage a number of times in the last few years.
All right, I've got 2 quick ones for you before we wrap this up. Where do you think Newcastle can get them? So if you think there was one sort of weakness that Newcastle could exploit, what would that be?
Yeah, I'd stick to Skriniar probably, because he's been the least convincing member of the defense so far. But I'd say sort of specific to the defense, if Hakimi gets too far forward, because Hernandez is much more balanced, much more disciplined, because he also plays the central defender. But Hakimi, if you give him the ability to sort of roam forward and chip in from an attacking sense, he can sometimes get caught out too high up the pitch. Also, Donnarumma. Luis Enrique is not a huge fan of Donnarumma when he's got the ball at his feet. Donnarumma is a fantastic shot stopper. He's got excellent reflexes.
He's a big boy too.
Yeah, he is. And I'm sure he would have filled in his teammates about that. But when the ball gets played back to him and he has to control it with his feet, then things start to get a little bit more complicated. So I'd say sort of somewhere between Skriniar and Donnarumma is probably the sweet spot that Newcastle want to be targeting. But equally, if PSG sort of have their tails up early on in the game and Hakimi gets forward more and more, then sort of getting in behind on the left is probably quite an exploitable route for Newcastle as well.
Yeah, okay. And it doesn't matter if it's Almiron or Murphy or Gordon, there is pace on their wings as well to get in behind. And Isak's probably going to have to shoulder most of the attacking burden as well. And he's pretty quick. So if they can get up sort of in the front foot and get in their faces, hopefully that can cause them a few problems. You mentioned you've done your prediction before. What was your prediction?
I am going to go for a PSG win. Let's say 2-1. I'll give you the goal.
Mate, I'll be happy with it. I just want to see a goal, mate. I don't care. Just a goal will make me happy. But we'll wrap it up there. Probably we've touched on a lot of things to look out for. We don't want to make this pod longer than the actual game needs to be. So I appreciate you jumping on again, Jonathan. I know you're a very busy man. We're very grateful that you've agreed to jump on again, mate. And good luck. Like I said, if you want to catch his work, jump on CBS Sports as well, and you'll find him on there. Thanks for your time, mate, and really appreciate it.
No, thanks a lot for having me on. Always a pleasure, and possibly catch up around the game in Paris in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely, mate. Thank you, and thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time with our review show. I think maybe Thursday night, and then a bit of a preview for the weekend's game in the Premier League as well. So we'll catch you then.